Stinging rebuke today from the federal judiciary on a day one priority for Donald Trump, an executive order that curbs birthright citizenship for children born here of undocumented immigrants. It strikes at some of the basic questions of what it means to be an American. A federal district court judge in Maryland putting in place a nationwide injunction against the Trump administration's order, and it appears to have some staying power. As the New York Times reports, in most cases, a preliminary injunction remains in force until a case is resolved or a higher court overturns it. Speaking from the bench, the judge said this, quote, "The executive order conflicts with the plain language of the 14th Amendment, contradicts 125-year-old binding Supreme Court precedent, and runs counter to our nation's 250-year history of citizenship by birth. The United States Supreme Court has resoundingly rejected the president's interpretation of the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. In fact, no court in the country has ever endorsed the president's interpretation. This court will not be the first." The judge lays out the stakes of the case for every American, adding this, quote, "Citizenship is a most precious right expressly guaranteed by the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It is said that the right to U.S. citizenship is a right no less precious than life or liberty." The case was brought by 5 undocumented pregnant women and an immigrant rights group. An attorney for the plaintiffs told the judge this, quote, "The parents covered by the order have lived in the U.S. for decades. They're not temporary visitors. They have made America their home, and they're entitled to have their children subject to the same constitutional right that every other child in America has." Today's ruling is the administration's second defeat in the matter of a few weeks on this issue. Last month, a federal judge in Seattle had issued a 14-day restraining order and a ruling in which he slammed the Trump administration, saying this, quote, "I have difficulty understanding how a member of the bar can state unequivocally that this is a constitutional order. It boggles my mind. Where were the lawyers when this decision was being made?" We're back with Sarah and John. Sarah, this kind of language, when it came from, I think it was a federal judge named Judge Carter in California, seemed to focus the minds of Congress. It preceded the special the congressional investigation into January 6th. And I wonder if you think the clarity with which the judges are rebuking the overreach by Trump and the lack of any founding in the Constitution will have any slowing impact.
I do think it'll have some slowing impact, but more importantly, the Constitution will have the slowing impact. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to read you the quick clause in the 14th Amendment, which says, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." That's it. That's what it says. And so this isn't a public opinion question. This isn't a question of like what Donald Trump thinks. It's just right there, stated plainly in the Constitution. And any judge who can read will uphold it. And so, I mean, I guess you could get to some place where there's some kind of a constitutional showdown between, Donald Trump's executive order and the courts. But there's not a Donald Trump would have to be overriding the Constitution. Like, there's just no question here. It's a straightforward thing. And look, Donald Trump has obviously spent a lot of time demonizing immigration and our immigration laws, and maybe they will even succeed here as a messaging matter in making the fact that people born in this country from people who are undocumented, that they shouldn't be citizens. But even if they won the public opinion fight, they would still lose the constitutional fight because it is completely straightforward.
Maybe. I mean, maybe in the sense that, maybe in the sense that I think that, look, it was Sarah's colleague, Jonathan Last, who was on the podcast with me, on my podcast earlier this week, who made this point. The plain language of the Constitution endorses birthright citizenship. There are 2 votes in the Supreme Court who will vote for Trump on anything, in Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito. Okay, you got a 7-2 court at the Supreme Court, which is where this case is going to go. Get a 7-2 ruling in favor of rejects Trump's claim. Trump, as Jonathan Last asked the question, Trump stands up and goes, tells the Supreme Court to pound sand, says, we think this ruling is illegitimate, and we're going to continue to, we're just not going to issue birth certificates to children of undocumented people in America. What happens then? Does anybody really think that that's inconceivable? That Trump will test the Supreme Court's power in that way at some point in this term? Does everybody think, Sarah? I don't think Sarah thinks that's inconceivable.
Sarah?
It's not inconceivable.
Yeah. Well, quoting Jonathan Last at me is unfair because he is the bleakest colleague and friend that I have.
Yes, but not wrong. But sometimes not wrong.
Go ahead, Sarah.
He is right on occasion. He's been known to be right on occasion because by taking the bleakest outlook, that has proved him that has allowed him to be right during the Trump administration. Yeah. So you're right. I mean, he might dare the Supreme Court. And he's going to stress all of our systems. Yeah. That won't change the fact that it will be fundamentally unconstitutional. At that point, we don't have a republic anymore. We don't have a country anymore.
More pieces of the federal government on the chopping block. But President Trump's hatchet man is facing increasing scrutiny himself as Elon Musk hacks away at the federal workforce with what appears to be no oversight. Democrats are demanding accountability. Behind the scenes, Trump aides have had to remind Musk that he is, in fact, an employee, not the boss, and reports to the White House. But that hasn't slowed down the downsizing. The CIA is the latest agency offering buyouts to employees. And at the U.S. Agency for International Development, a key target of Trump's recent cutbacks, almost all staffers are being placed on administrative leave. Joining us now, senior political correspondent for The Hill, Amy Parnes, along with two MSNBC political analysts, Republican strategist Susan Del Percio and Democratic strategist Basil Smikle. Good to see all of you. So much to discuss. Where do you begin, really? Amy, as we're learning, our NBC team is reporting that 20,000 plus government employees have already indicated they're going to accept the buyout. What are you hearing from people inside Washington about how they're looking at this right now?
It's chaotic. I mean, I'm hearing from people inside these institutions. There's chaos. No one knows what's happening, if they'll have a job, if they're going to be pushed out. There's nervousness among Democrats. There's more nervousness even among Republicans. They know that Trump came in to clear the swamp again, but they didn't know just how far he would go. And I'm hearing that Republicans are getting a little bit nervous about how this is playing out, how Elon Musk is sort of dictating the terms. And this is problematic, I think. And that's why you're seeing a lot of pushback. You're starting to see a little more pushback from the White House and from Susie Wiles and other people, basically saying he is not the boss. He's here to help. He's here to help clear the swamp, but he's not in charge of it.
You said the CIA cutbacks in particular, the buyouts for all these CIA agents is particularly alarming?
It is alarming because it came right on the same day as this announcement the president made about Gaza. And so I'm hearing from people inside that institution, and they're saying, what is happening? You can't put a price tag on institutional knowledge. And the fact that all this chaos is brewing inside that institution is really problematic right at this moment.
Susan, Republicans fashion themselves as the party of national security, back in the blue, for example, but they do seem to be looking the other way to a degree when it comes to what we're seeing at the CIA or within the FBI, the purge there, and of course, can't forget the blanket pardons of all the January 6th convicted people. So are you surprised that this is how the GOP is reacting?
No, because I think they're trying to follow it as much as anyone else, and they don't know which way to step is the bigger concern for them. So the buyout, that's different than the purges and the administrative leaves. The buyout is simply to federal employees. You can get paid through September if you announce your intentions by this week. Now, of course, if I was an employee, I would very much wonder, how are you going to pay me through September? Like, I wouldn't take the buyout because I don't think Trump can deliver on it. I don't think they will get paid. That being aside, putting the purge and the CIA issues or employees at issue, bigger concern is what's not getting done. To me, it's not just the institutional knowledge, which is critical. But that means you don't have agents on the ground. You know how long it takes to be a well-trained CIA agent?
I don't know, but I can imagine. It takes a lot of experience.
Years and years.
Yeah.
You just don't put them through the academy for 3 months. Same with the FBI. So what violent crimes aren't being tracked by the FBI? What work is not getting done? That is the public safety risk that I see with a lot of that, on top of the uncertainty of a workforce that doesn't know if they're coming or going. And frankly, I don't think the administration knows if they're coming or going, because they have to reverse themselves left and right.
And Basil, you take a look at somebody like Marco Rubio, who's now the Secretary of State. He was confirmed unanimously to that position. He's now overseeing the dismantling of USAID, and that's become the face, it seems, of the government purges that Democrats are saying are unconstitutional, by the way. Did Democrats get played?
No, I don't think Democrats got played. In fact, we talked about this. If you remember, throughout last year, there was a lot of conversation on the left about being mindful of the impact of Project 2025, because it's not a 10-year plan. It's not a one-term plan. It is a 180-day plan. Guess what? It started. And what you're seeing is the impact of not just disruptive politics, but disruptive governance. That's what I think a lot of Republicans, particularly in the Senate, don't want to have to deal with, because they can't answer questions from their constituents about what's happening tomorrow. And you have someone like an Elon Musk, who is perhaps appointed, whatever that term means to Donald Trump, to be able to go in and do this. In another country, this would be called a coup. He is unaccountable, and he's going through with a team of people who are also not accountable into emails, into payment systems, without care and concern, seemingly, for the impact, the short and long-term impact of this, but doing so probably for his benefit. Where has this ever really happened in our history? And if I'm a Republican right now, particularly in the House, that has the the Republicans have the second slimmest majority in the history of this country, I'd be really concerned.
Well, yet at the same time, the Republicans are probably thinking, oh, you have blame it on Elon Musk cutting things. They're getting part of their agenda done, and they don't have to do it through legislation, which means they don't have to take bad votes. It's just a different way of
And I think my point was that somebody like Marco Rubio, who they all thought would kind of hold the line and be more traditional in his role, is going along with what the Trump administration wants, hook, line, and sinker, it seems. Democrats are expressing frustration, though, Amy. Here's some fiery remarks from their protest yesterday outside the Treasury Department.
This is the most corrupt bargain we've ever seen in American history. We have got to tell Elon Musk, nobody elected your ass.
We don't pledge allegiance to Elon Musk. We don't pledge allegiance to the creepy 22-year-olds working for Elon Musk.
We are going to be in your face. We are going to be on your asses, and we are going to make sure you understand what democracy looks like.
Okay, so Justin, as we're watching these comments, this is what's happening on Capitol Hill. The top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee called to subpoena Elon Musk, and now they're debating on it. They're going to vote here. Amy, do voters want their leaders to be doing more to fight back?
Yes, but it's tricky because we saw what happened in November. And so I'm hearing from a lot of Democrats that what they have been doing is not good enough. Having Senator Schumer out there essentially saying we will not rest, and having all of these lawmakers out there is not good enough. They need action, but they need a plan. I think that's what they need more of. They don't need to be screaming in the streets. They need to show voters what they are doing. And so Democrats are kind of, expressing that right now. They are frustrated, but they want their party leaders to be doing more. They want to take this fight to the streets, but they need to be doing more, and they have to be doing that right now. And so that's why I think they're going to have to change. A lot of people want people to burn the party down and build anew. And so I think that you're going to start seeing a lot of that coming up.
Basil, we hear Democrats saying Elon Musk is acting as president, But we have reporting that, at least quietly behind the scenes, he's being reminded that he still reports to the chief of staff, Susie Wiles. Do you see her being able to rein him in?
No. I'm sorry. Yeah, no. I don't see that.
Okay, next question.
I don't see that at all because, number one, can she even rein in her boss? Probably not. And so I don't think you can, now that Elon Musk has the keys to government, I don't really see anybody being able to rein him in the short term. Maybe down the road after a lot of damage is already done, perhaps that actually happens. But I will say, just going back to something that Amy said, when you see Democrats out there standing in front of Treasury or protesting and such, those young members that are emerging as real stars right now, not only AOC, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, Chris Murphy, who's already been very, very active. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see this kind of new movement of younger Democrats in D.C., but also sort of out in the communities and in the states, really trying to hold both sides, Democrats and Republicans, accountable. And perhaps that sort of signals to Donald Trump and to the administration that, hey, we've got to turn the fire down a little bit. But I don't know that happens in the short term.
I know you want to get in there, Susan. Let me just really quick say we're monitoring what's happening right now in that House Oversight Committee. And again, a top Democrat on that committee calling to subpoena Elon Musk. The debate is still underway. I want to play what some key Senate Republicans have told us about Musk's recent actions.
He's basically doing an audit, so I hope that he'll soon be issuing a thorough report to Congress and the public.
Do you have concern at all about the White House, through Elon Musk or others, seeking to cut off already congressionally appropriated funds?
Well, I assume that's going to be the subject of some litigation and further discussion.
He's throwing out big ideas. And if anybody thinks that all of these big ideas are going to be implemented to conclusion, they don't understand the process of disruption. Everybody's acting like Congress doesn't exist anymore.
Do you and the other senators know what
thinking about will require congressional approval to actually structurally change them?
Susan, these aren't hypotheticals. It's happening. So when are they going to then step in?
It is happening, and I think the biggest mistake Democrats are making is making it all about Elon Musk. Say Donald Trump is doing this. Donald Trump is purging the FBI. Donald Trump is cutting aid. Donald Trump is preventing packages, I know it reversed, from China to come in. But Elon Musk, by you doing that, he is unelected. He is operating. He takes all of the fire away from Donald Trump's feet. Stop it. Call out the president and say the president is doing presidential overreach. Then put those Republicans on the line, like Von Hilliard did. And he said, if you notice his words, Elon Musk through the administration. Hold the White House accountable. Right now, they're giddy that all the attention is everywhere else.
And I'll just say very quickly, you showed John Cornyn from Texas. He's got a primary coming up. And so that's one of the things that might come out of this is that you're going to start seeing more factions within the Republican Party and challenging each other and holding current members' feet to the fire. Not sure what the end result is, but primaries force people to act.
There's an attorney at a financial regulatory agency who told the Washington Post this. Who makes a life-changing decision in 10 days with no certainty other than Elon Musk's word? I mean, you just have to imagine what intensity there is for these folks. And it's not an exaggeration. This is a life-altering decision. And some people are saying, I want to make sure I get some money. I don't want to just get fired. But it's not clear where the money's coming from.
Well, if you get fired, you have civil recourse, because if you're a civil servant in the civil servants community of the federal government, meaning you're not a political appointee, but you are a full-fledged civil servant, you have protections through the federal union, et cetera. So those, you're not left out there. But
you wouldn't blame people if they were worried about whether or not.
No, that's where I was going. No, absolutely. That's where I was going next. The point is to make you worried.
Yeah.
The point is to scare you into committing to an action that is on its face illegal. And there have been, it's not me saying that. There have been, lawyers who do these cases, handle these federal civil cases, civil employment cases, who've been very clear about what this means and how this plays out. But that's the point. We confuse you and scare you into taking an action against your self-interest and thinking also that you're somehow going to receive a benefit. It is not clear, nowhere near clear, how any of this gets paid for. These are dollars that are not in part that have been appropriated by the Congress to pay specifically for these things. So there's no guarantee that if you take this buyout, that you will actually get paid 9 months worth of salary and benefit. That's a lot of money.
I don't know if you saw the video we had, Michael, the protest, and there was a young man holding a sign saying, my mom and dad both lost their jobs. So there's that immediate impact for folks. And then we all know that when something like this happens, and this is tens of thousands of people potentially losing their jobs, many of them centered in greater D.C., Maryland, Virginia, right? How vast would the disruption be, obviously to their lives, their families' lives, but the entire economy of the area, housing, small businesses? I mean, the tentacles are broad.
It is a massive impact for states like Maryland, Virginia, D.C., certainly regional, federal offices that employ a significant number of federal employees in states around the country absolutely will have a financial impact because unless you're getting a check from the federal government on Friday, if you accept the buyout by the deadline on Thursday, that will allow you to then go ahead and at least for the next 9 months have the security of having that money in advance. You're going to be wishing and hoping and praying at some point in this process you're going to get paid. How do you cover your mortgage? How do you cover your kitchen table expenses? How do you cover your household expenses? How do you pay for your kids' education? All of those pieces still matter and going to be important concerns. Donald Trump isn't addressing that. Donald Trump is not offering you the solace of knowing that you're going to get a guaranteed payment. He's just telling you to resign because he doesn't want the stain of having to fire you on his watch and the ramifications from that on his desk. So that's the reality of this. You're just a pawn in a grotesque political move by a man who told us he was going to be a dictator on day one. We're now into day what?
We're just starting week 3.
Yeah, we're just starting week 3. You got this rogue individual in Elon Musk who's unelected, who's acting like he's supreme leader, acting out on Donald Trump's wishes. And for Elon Musk, he needs to know he's potentially getting punked here too, because when this goes south, Donald Trump won't know who the hell Elon Musk is. Remember Vivek Ramaswamy? Have you heard his name at all? So look, the reality of this is real for everyday Americans who bought into this idea that this, streamlining and downsizing of the government is going to be a good thing. Chris, here's the reality.
There have been some protests. Well, I don't want to stop you from talking about the rally, but the protests are out there, right? In Washington, the Upper Senate Park today, yesterday outside the Treasury Department. Take a look. We have some of the cities where people are demonstrating today against President Trump's policies and executive orders for what's called 50 states, 50 protests one day. And you got to wonder if it has the potential to grow into a bigger movement as some of these impacts that you're talking about start to be felt. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't have to run for re-election, but Republicans in Congress do.
They do, but here's the rub. Federal employees protesting is one thing. Protesting the loss of their jobs, shutting down of USAID, all of those things are important and they're relevant. But it becomes much more important to a member of Congress when their constituents are standing in this crowd. Meaning mom and pop who aren't federal employees, they're protesting because guess what? They can't get the services that they once got because that employee has been fired. They can't get the resources they once received because that department or that program has been eliminated. There's been no explanation to real Americans out there who rely on the work that these federal employees do, right? There's been no conversation about how they're going to be impacted when these programs, we talk about foreign aid in a foreign land. What about the SNAP and food and education and health and other programs? You're about to see a man who doesn't believe in vaccines. What happens when the Department of Health starts doing what they plan to do? Right?
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, Michael, because we have some breaking news. It comes to us via our Dan DeLuce. Dan's with us now. The CIA, Dan, has sent a list of recently hired employees in an unclassified email to the White House?
Yes, that is exactly what's happened. As extraordinary as that may sound, the CIA, like all federal agencies, was under pressure to meet a deadline set by this executive order that the president issued about shrinking the federal workforce. And they had to send a list of recently hired employees, and they had no way to send it in a classified manner to the Office of Personnel Management. At least that's what we're told. That's the justification. So they sent an email, unclassified email, with a list of these newly hired employees, and they listed their first names and an initial of their last names. And talking to former intelligence officials and security experts, this is a highly risky move, as you can imagine. This is really an invitation, possibly, to adversaries to try to get a hold of that list, check it back with other information, and then there would be identifying employees of the Central Intelligence Agency. So this is potentially a counterintelligence disaster, according to a lot of experts and former officials. And this is all part of this kind of chaos we've been seeing in this hectic few days, past 2 weeks, with these executive orders, and a tremendous pressure now on all the federal agencies to comply with these orders. And the CIA seems to have gotten caught on an axle here. We'll see if there's more explanation, but that's what we're hearing.
Michael, let me make a couple of points about this. Number one, yes, first names and last initial, but I want to quote a former senior intelligence official who said, any foreign intelligence service worth its weight could apply research and analytic tools to marry up these names and initials with other public records to identify and target many of them. And worth noting that in recent years, the CIA has been pushing to recruit employees who have Chinese language skills. What do you make of these names going out in an unclassified email?
Consider it already in the hands of our enemies. You have to look at it from that perspective, given the reporting as we just heard it. This is chaos. This is unmanaged, right? It's deliberate. They think that this is cute, that we are, uprooting the deep state. Donald Trump and his ilk are the deep state. That has been the sorry sucker play this entire time. It's the whole bait and switch. They are the very thing they're trying to scare us of and make us afraid of. And they're executing in that manner. So consider this. This is just the tip, Chris. Guess what you're going to be reporting tomorrow, next week? It's going to be more fantastical than what you just reported. It's going to be the most outrageously brain-dumb crap you've ever seen. But it's right within their wheelhouse. You've got 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds who have in control of Treasury under Elon Musk. How ass-backwards stupid is that? And yet Donald Trump and everybody's walking around Washington, Mike Johnson included, acting like, well, this is very good for how we're going to clean up the government. Yeah, and our adversaries are like, more please, thank you very much. Because now they're going to be a part of the sinews and infrastructure of our federal system as much as the CIA is. Unsecured email with sensitive personnel information? You've got to be kidding me. And nobody on Capitol Hill, there's no Republican leadership who think that's the problem. This is the country's got to get a grip here. I get it. The price of eggs. Understood. I get it. What it costs to put gas in the tank. But the price we're paying now and about to pay after this is going to be far greater than what a dozen eggs cost your ass. Trust me on that.
We're going to start this morning with President Trump's brazen proposal for Gaza. Yesterday, the president announced the United States should seek control of the enclave and that the nearly 2 million Palestinians living there should relocate to Egypt or Jordan, a move both countries have vehemently opposed. The president made the comment during a joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The two leaders met at the White House yesterday, and it comes as negotiators are discussing the next phase of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire agreement, which is supposed to include more humanitarian aid and reconstruction supplies for the people of Gaza.
We should go to other countries of interest with humanitarian hearts, and there are many of them that want to do this, and build various domains that will ultimately be occupied by the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza, ending the death and destruction and, frankly, bad luck. This can be paid for by neighboring countries of great wealth. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 12. It could be numerous sites, or it could be one large site. But the people will be able to live in comfort and peace. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. I envision a world, people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I think the potential in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And I think the entire world, representatives from all over the world will be there, and they'll live there. Palestinians also. Palestinians will live there. Many people will live there. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
Trump's comments have sent shockwaves throughout the region and here at home. In Saudi Arabia, the country's foreign affairs ministry said its stance on the establishment of a Palestinian state remains a firm, unwavering position. Hamas released a statement rejecting Trump's plans, calling his comments a recipe for creating chaos and tension in the region. Meanwhile, NBC News caught up with several senators yesterday to ask them about what the president said.
At first I heard of it, I said, seems like there's a few kinks in that slinky. We'll see what he meant.
What do you mean by kinks in that slinky?
Well, I don't know if you know about a slinky, but if it kinks, you can't use it anymore. I don't know how it would play out if what he said, or what you all have said. I haven't seen the first-hand account, but obviously that's not going to happen.
I think that'd be a tough place to be assigned if you're an American soldier. So, yeah, we'll see what the Arab world says, but, you know, that'd be problematic at many, many levels.
I'm speechless. That's insane. I can't think of a place on earth that would welcome American troops less and where any positive outcome is less likely, and why on earth we would abandon decades of well-established humanitarian programs around the world and now launch into one of the world's greatest humanitarian challenges.
I mean, the United States should not take anybody's home. Number two, us nation building in the Middle East, if you haven't learned anything from 2001 to 2025, you haven't been paying attention. We are very bad at that.
All right, some bipartisan condemnation there. Jonathan Lemire, your latest reporting for The Atlantic references Senator Graham's response. It's entitled Trump's Wild Plan for Gaza. And you write in part this: any direct U.S. intervention in Gaza would fly in the face of Trump's long-standing desire to disengage from foreign entanglements. He began negotiations to withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan, wants to slash aid to Ukraine, and has threatened to abandon military positions in Korea, Europe, and Syria. And it may face pushback at home from some usually reliable allies. I think that would be an interesting proposal, Senator Lindsey Graham told reporters on Capitol Hill after Trump spoke. We'll see what our Arab friends say about that. I think most South Carolinians would probably not be excited about sending Americans to take over Gaza. It might be problematic. And Jonathan Lemire, Tom Tellis, I think, had the quote of the day: a few kinks in the slinky.
Yeah, that's a new one. I'm not aware of that particular phrase, but it works. We'll run with it this morning. But yeah, it works. It is a breathtakingly audacious proposal here from Donald Trump, one that was indeed met with a lot of pushback immediately. First, as noted, this flies in the face of how Trump views foreign policy. He wants to pull back U.S. engagement. And yesterday, he was asked repeatedly whether or not U.S. troops would be sent to Gaza to help secure it while it's being rebuilt. He did not rule that out. This, of course, is a conflict that has been in the Gaza. There's decades in the making, contested land since Israel's creation in 1948. This is the first time a U.S. president has suggested something like this, with the U.S. being an occupying force. We have seen that Saudi Arabia, as you just said, already, which is seemingly close to normalizing relations with Israel, has already said we're not going to do this. And that is just a preview of what is expected to be the reaction from throughout the Arab world, who want to see the Palestinians get their own state, who don't want to be taking Palestinian refugees into their own country, who don't want to hand Israel potentially that territory. It's certainly a significant win for Prime Minister Netanyahu were this to happen. The right-wing elements in his coalition want to move in both on Gaza and, of course, the West Bank. And we also, this is Donald Trump, a White House aide told me last night, who does feel emboldened with a swagger, if you will, in this second term, believing that he could get a big deal done. Few would be bigger than this, even though part of this might even be a real estate transaction, something that he has considered in the past, talking about Gaza's beachfront property, even the Riviera of the Middle East. For much, much more on this, let's bring in President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. He is author of the weekly newsletter Home and Away, which is, of course, available on Substack, as well as retired CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos. He is an NBC News security and intelligence analyst. Richard, let's start with you. I mean, your reaction, it is hard to know at a time how seriously to take this. Is this something, is Donald Trump actually suggesting sending military troops to the Middle East, to Gaza, or is this the beginning of some sort of negotiation, an extreme position, if you will, perhaps to apply pressure on the region and allows him to maybe dial it back a little bit to get something done? But even that seems so far-fetched.
It seems far-fetched. You know, we're all used to the idea of an opening bid. And so one of my first reactions was to try to play this out. Where could this lead? You've got, for example, the King of Jordan showing up in Washington in a few days. One of the dangers is that Donald Trump actually tries to follow this up, puts enormous pressure on countries like Jordan, which are already vulnerable, threatens to remove, the $1.7 billion in aid. So I worry that this is a non-starter. Let me just say that with the Palestinians, Jonathan. Let's just posit that. This is going to be unacceptable to the Palestinians. The question is there follow-up? Does this cause crises in Jordan?
Right.
Does this cause crises in Egypt? Does this encourage some of the worst elements in Israel? You know, it's one thing to think big about the Middle East. When I thought the Trump administration might think big about the Middle East, I assumed it was to maybe press Bibi to go in the direction of some type of a Palestinian state, which, among other things, would bring the Saudis on board and so forth. This is thinking big, but in a way that's totally at odds with the history and political realities of the region. So it makes me think, one, what you mentioned, the swagger. There's a grandiosity to this, as though history doesn't matter. I think there's a little bit of that here, that in a sense that Donald Trump is not bounded by history. And also, It raises fundamental questions, and you're closer to it than I am, as is Ali, about the policy process. You could not have a rigorous policy process filled with experts on the Middle East and come up with this proposal. There is no way you could get from there to where we now are.
And Mika, as we see these images here of the devastation in Gaza, 15 months of conflict, but this is still home to 2.2 million people. And Donald Trump is talking about displacement on just a staggering scale.
I've heard a lot of different words about this, but the ones that stand out to me is this is impossible, this will never happen, maybe he doesn't mean it. And I would like to try and put a pause on that thinking to an extent, because I think we've learned by now, and a lot of what we talked about here on Morning Joe during the campaign is Donald Trump does mean it. He means it. This is a man who said during the campaign he would pardon January 6 rioters, and he has done so. This is a man who said that he would be your retribution and threatened retribution to people who worked on cases against him. That is happening right now in the FBI. Let's stop surmising as to whether or not he means it, because he means it. OK, so Mark Polymeropoulos, my question to you is, what will the promotion of this idea do to the delicate state of affairs in the region?
Right, Mika. And so I think every CIA station chief in the Middle East woke up this morning with a migraine headache, because there's a potential for a generational counterterrorism nightmare here. You have to look at the words that Donald Trump used yesterday, quote, take over Gaza. Own Gaza. These are triggering mechanisms for Islamic extremist groups. Remember, Osama bin Laden's biggest beef with the United States decades ago was the U.S. troop presence in Saudi Arabia. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, same thing, the insurgency based on U.S. troops in Iraq. So this kind of language only is going to galvanize groups that want to kill Americans. And if I was in the CIA and is still in the CIA and the counterterrorism community, I'd be monitoring the Islamic extremist forums, because this is just a tremendous own goal. And I worry that even if these are just words, as Richard said, perhaps part of some strange negotiating gambit, Americans might be less safe now. And I can't imagine anybody in the CIA or the State Department who would have advocated this approach.
Talk about the ceasefire agreement in place. I mean, there are hostages still due to come home. We are watching these reunions. They're incredibly emotional. I know President Trump is very much into seeing these reunions and positive things like that happening, hoping to take credit for them and things like that. What could these comments and this intention do to the ceasefire agreement that's in place right now?
Well, sure, Mika, because there's a delicate balance that's going on right now, and we're trying to get through this phase one, perhaps to get to phase two, but there are still hostages who need to be released. And so if you're Hamas right now and you hear these comments, you know, how do you, even if there was some, distrust in the past, but how do you see the U.S. as an interlocutor that you can agree with when they're saying all of the Palestinians have to be removed from the Gaza Strip with all of this kind of fanciful language? So, even this kind of strange rhetoric from Trump could really alter a very delicate negotiating pattern right now, which has seen hostages released. More are supposed to come this weekend. We'll see.
All right, NBC News security and intelligence analyst Mark Polymeropoulos, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.